Disclaimer: this video is made purely out of personal interest and should not be taken as a serious analysis. Salve, my friends, and welcome back to S.P.Q.R. Productions. Today, I wanted to cover a subject that has long been a topic of personal interest to me: the connections between the Roman Empire and the modern-day United States, and how these connections can be used to better understand the modern political landscape and help to analyze what the future may hold for the nation. To understand why I would choose to compare specifically these two empires, I've decided to make a list of some of the similarities between the Romans and the US. Here is a fragment of that list. The Romans founded their republic after overthrowing a tyrannical king, like the US. They formed their own constitution, like the US, through the establishment of the 12 Tables, which were a series of laws and rules that all citizens had available. Their governmental positions had limited terms, like the US. They had a bicameral legislature as well as other checks and balances in their government, like the US. They had age requirements for governmental positions, like the US. They had a very organized judicial system as well as a right to a fair trial for all, like the US. They had a rapid period of expansion in which they conquered the vast majority of the region, in their case Europe, in our case the Western Hemisphere. And they faced lots of the same corruption that is occurring in our modern-day government, such as bribes and unfair elections. As you can see, much of both the structure and the initial outcome of both of these nations is very similar. So, back to the topic at hand. What can the fall of the Roman Republic tell us about what will happen to the modern-day United States? There are three key factors that I believe provide evidence to establish an answer. The first of these is the increase of political extremism. The second is the inability to move laws through Congress, and the third is the presence of overzealous politicians on the political landscape. So, let's take a look at these three topics and see what they reveal. Over the past 20 years, the divide between the Democratic and Republican parties has grown tremendously. Extremism has taken over the country, both in the people and in government officials. It has gotten to the point where a mere disagreement can turn into a full-blown riot. Violence has taken hold of the streets, and order is slowly but steadily declining. Similarly, between the years of 60 and 44 BC, Rome saw a similar political divide. However, instead of Democrats and Republicans, it came in the form of the Populare and Optimate parties. Among other things, Optimates have been seen as supporters of the continued authority of the Senate, politicians who operated mostly in the Senate, or opponents of the Populare. The Populares have also been seen as focusing on operating before the popular assemblies, generally in opposition to the Senate, using the populace, rather than the Senate, as means for advantage. Reference to the Optimates, also called Boni, good men, and Populares are found among writings of Roman authors of the 1st century BC. The distinction between the terms is most clearly established in Cicero's Procestio, a speech given and published in 56 BC, where he framed the two labels against each other. Without going much further down the rabbit hole, all that you really need to know is that the Optimates were elites who came from good families that stood for more old-fashioned values. One could compare this group to modern-day conservatives. And the Populares were progressive, non-elite members of the government who advocated for a variety of civil liberties and rights. One could consider this group to be more like the modern-day liberals. As time went on and Rome grew, it reached a point where the two predominant political topics of discussion were grain dole distribution and land reform, both of which were very aggressively fought over in the Senate. While Populares advocated for a larger annual grain dole, which provided citizens with more free food to aid them economically, and more land reform, which provided farmers and ex-soldiers without any property land to work on, and vice versa for the Optimates. It is worth noting, however, that the tensions over these issues were present far before they became a factor in the fall of the Republic, as they were evident as far back as the late 2nd century BC, where the Gracchi brothers, two tribunes who advocated for land reform, were killed over the issue. One could compare these two topics to many of the social and economic debates that face the U.S. today, such as Social Security and the debate over capitalism. Why these issues couldn't be resolved after so much time is in fact what leads us into our next point, that being a legislation block. In a similar sense to the modern U.S. Congress's seeming inability to get anything done, the Romans were in a position where nothing could get past both the senators and the tribunes, which were two major positions that determined whether a law passed or not. Senators, as we talked about, were generally much more conservative, while tribunes, who were plebs elected by the people, were much more liberal. Whenever senators wanted to pass a law or change legislation that was already in place, they first had to vote on it themselves, and if it got passed, it would go to the tribunes, who could either pass it or veto it. A tribune's veto was sacred, and, if it was used, there was no way to revoke it. This led to a block in the legislation, which meant that these two issues, like many others, could never be resolved. As mentioned, the divide between the House and the Senate in the U.S. had led to a similar situation. The inability to resolve political debates is one of the major things that led to the third and final topic we will discuss, which is the presence of an extremist politician on the political landscape. In the case of the United States, the past two presidential elections are great examples of both parties looking to seize control of the executive level through the implementation of a more extreme leader. In ancient Rome, this was most clearly seen through Julius Caesar, whose takeover many considered to be the thing that ended the Republic. I want to avoid getting too political in this video, so I will only touch on it briefly, but if you are interested, feel free to research this topic further independently. So, what can we learn about the future of the United States from this? If the Roman Republic is any indication of our country's future, things don't look good. However, I can say with confidence that factors such as globalism and additional checks and balances mean that despite the ominous connections, we will most likely not be seeing an end to the United States soon. In fact, Rome's end serves as an example that the United States can follow and learn from, and, hopefully, use to its advantage in the future. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you again very, very soon.